There are so many injuries piling up to finish out this fantasy football season that it is crucial to get the waiver wires right, and everybody is frantically picking up anybody they can find off the waiver wire that have some kind of points they've scored over the past few weeks. That is not the way to do it. In this video, I'll be giving you guys a list of the players that are absolute traps on the waiver wire, so we won't destroy our roster from the inside out for the fantasy playoffs or even this last week of matchups, because we are smart. If you guys have just found this video and you're new to the page, make sure to subscribe because I'll be dropping some game, and make sure to stick around to the end of the video because I'll be giving you guys a list of a bunch of players that we can drop and they're safe to drop now to make room on our bench. But to kick it off, I hate wasting time. Tyler Boyd cannot be added. I know the waiver wire is pretty bare at this time of the year in fantasy, but he should not be an option you even double consider. Yes, he's averaging 6 targets over the last 5 weeks, but this offense is still one of the worst and projected to be one of the worst for the rest of the season, this week coming up, and everything else in between by all the line makers and sports books. And if we know anything about sports books, is that they know way more about football, sports, anything than we do, because they got to make money, so it's pretty safe to go by those lines. And it might be hard not to pick up Tyler Boyd because this offense did look good last week. I mean, they put up over 30 points, 350 passing yards, and Jake Browning looked pretty decent, but the sad truth and reality of it is that we were holding on to Tyler Boyd in the beginning of the season because Joe Burrow was the quarterback. There was a whole lot of upside, a lot of passing volume. It was a high dynamic offense, and when we came across the case of Jamar Chase or T. Higgins getting injured, he could fill in and be a flex guy that actually had a lot of upside and value. Now without Joe Burrow, it's not going to be the same. Despite last week, Browning can still barely support T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and when T. Higgins was out, Tyler Boyd still wasn't viable. So what makes him viable now that T. Higgins is healthy? The Bengals do have a favorable schedule coming up with a lot of pass heavy games, but still he's the 4th option on this Bengals team. He's not worth it. Just don't pick him up. And make sure to comment any questions you have about start sits, ads, don't ads, anything. Make sure to comment it while you're watching this video because I answer 100% of them. But Dameon Pierce and I guess Devin Singletary at the same time, both of them combined, if anybody drops them or you see them on the waiver wire, don't think twice about picking them up. This is really not the time to go through and do it. Now if you already have one of them or you expect an injury, which really isn't something that we can bank on, you can add them because if one of them were to get injured, they would be an absolute league winner. It's not really worth rostering a guy just because you think there's going to be an injury, because you could say that about pretty much everybody. But outside of the handcuff factors, do not add any of these guys. With Dameon Pierce back from injury and back in the mix of this backfield, it's going to be a 50-50 split. It's about a 60-40 right now, but none of these running backs are going to separate themselves from the pack. I know Devin Singletary had a pretty decent stretch of games, a couple 100-yard games when Pierce was injured. That's not going to continue now that he's here. But again, now that we're gearing up for the fantasy playoffs or trying to get this one last win, we can't really be getting too cute in our lineups. We don't need to be adding these running backs. Yes, they have some upside. The offense is great. They're pretty efficient in the red zone, but a lot of this efficiency and yardage comes through the air and not in the ground. So unless one of these running backs scores a touchdown consistently every game, they're not going to be viable and they're not going to have fantasy points to make you want to start them. The Texans are 23rd in rush yards and they're bottom 5 if you take out those couple games that Devin Singletary had over 100 that were pretty much not important at all, and they're 15th in rush attempts. So it's not like they're just not trying to run at all and abandoning the run game. They're pretty much average in rush attempts, but one of the worst teams in rush yards. They are completely inefficient. Dameon Pierce has been the most inefficient his entire career. He's averaging under 3 yards per carry. Singletary hasn't necessarily been that good outside of that couple game sample size. They have a tough schedule coming up against the Jets, Titans, and Browns, and when you're in a committee backfield, the schedules really do matter. And when we're shooting for really high upside lineups to get us into the playoffs, these are not guys that we can be going through and getting. Again, if you want to handcuff them, it's perfectly fine, but these aren't guys that I'm wasting a roster spot on just in case. And I'm seeing a lot of hype around Devante Parker as well. Yes, I understand. He had his highest target share of the season at 9, and he had 5 the week before that. So you could look at this and say, well, this is coming right off of the bye week, so clearly something's changed. If you've been around this page for long enough, you know I talk about these bye weeks. Teams usually finalize their roster and get the depth charts kind of finished after these bye weeks, which is why we see a whole bunch of uptick in usage and snaps for rookies. But this is simply just coincidence. That's not what's happening here. What is happening is that Demario Douglas got injured in week 12. He only played 50% of the snaps, and that led Parker to have more of a snap share and target share. And then the week after that, obviously last week, he had a season high because there was no Demario Douglas. Pretty much giving the Patriots no choice but to put Parker as the wide receiver 1. Douglas is coming back this week. He's still going to be the wide receiver 1. There is simply not enough room for 2 viable wide receivers in this offense. They're having immense quarterback troubles. They can't figure out this offense. Douglas alone is already struggling to be fantasy startable and a flex guy. Now we have Ramondre Stevenson injured, probably out for the remainder of the fantasy season at least, so we're leaning on Ezekiel Elliott. They're just one of the worst offenses in the NFL. They scored 13 points in the last 3 games, put up 0 last week. Out of all players on this video, he is probably the trappiest trap get rid of it. But if you're seeing Miles Sanders on the waiver wire, which you probably will start to see over this week and probably the weeks before this as well, don't fall for it. He's actually still rostered in a decent amount of leagues, and I don't know why he is. He's an absolute paperweight sandbag on the end of your roster. I don't know why people have him on their team. I think it's got to be the name value, but there's absolutely no value here after Chuba Hubbard got named the RB1. Chuba comes out here in a matchup against the Buccaneers, which is very, very close. They only end up losing by 3, and he had a season high in 25 rush attempts, over 100 yards, really good usage in the receiving game. Pretty much every single role was his. Second down, 2-minute drills, third down, red zone. Chuba's continuing to see 60%, 70% of the snaps, and getting every single snap in the red zone, in the 5-yard line. He had 2 touchdowns on the day. There really is no role that Miles Sanders has. And when we look at RB2s or even split backfields, if one secondary running back has some kind of value, maybe it's a tie to the receiving game or the red zone role, we can be fine with it. But Miles Sanders literally has none of that. We could look at his chart and see, well, he had 8 carries last week, 15 the week before that. Maybe he's still used, but they're all just empty carries. They're not valuable whatsoever. He's averaging just under 3 yards per carry in a terrible offense that has 1 win. They can't move the ball. They're 31st ranked offense. They have one of the lowest rushing attempts, one of the lowest yards per carry. And it's as simple as, if you're not on the field, you can't get fantasy points because you don't have the opportunity. I don't think I need to go into it too much more. Really, everybody on this Panthers offense I'm a little bit worried about. But as far as the quarterbacks go, if you're still in that boat that needs one and is kind of picking through guys every single week, you miss the Sam Howells, you miss the Jordan Loves, you miss the Brock Purdy's, and all the mid-tier quarterbacks are gone. I know it's going to be tough, but Kenny Pickett is also getting ankle surgery. He's in a boot, which puts Mitch Trubisky as the starting quarterback for this week and probably the remainder of the weeks coming up, unless things were to change. Either way, any of the quarterbacks that were and could start for the Steelers, I don't want any part in. You could look at this and say,
well, they had a coaching change, it looks pretty good, they won a game, they're kind of scoring points now, Najee is kind of coming into his own.
No, don't pick him up. First of all, this does hurt all the pass catchers. I know Kenny Pickett isn't the best quarterback, but Mitch Trubisky is not the answer either. He didn't look terrible filling in for about the second half of the game last week, but again, if Jake Browning can't look like a league winner with Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, all of these guys, neither can Mitch Trubisky. And they do face the Patriots and Colts, which are tougher defensive matchups in the next few weeks. Just leave them on the waivers. But now for the promised list of players we can go through and drop from our bench. The reason we kind of want to clear space on our bench in this time of the fantasy football playoffs is because now is when we need to condense our bench for the guys that can actually help us. The third, the fourth string wide receivers aren't going to do anything for us. If we get a big injury to a guy like Stephon Diggs or Austin Eckler, we're probably not going to win the playoffs anyway. So we need to be getting our backup handcuff running backs and other guys that are actually valuable. If you guys want a full breakdown on that, I posted a video about the top waiver wire ads coming into this last week of the fantasy football season before the playoffs. Make sure to go watch that. It has timestamps all throughout it. It takes 2 seconds to watch. If you are interested, it's pinned up at the top. You can go watch it. But I got to start it off with, unfortunately, it is safe to drop Tank Dell and also Kenny Pickett as well. Season-ending injuries, there's no point to having him on your bench. If you have an IR slot, maybe you can keep him. But I'm also dropping Devonta Foreman, and for that case, pretty much all of these Bears running backs, unless you are completely in dire need of running backs. This is a 3 RB committee. None of them really have that much value. Justin Fields is having a whole bunch of design runs. Roschon is the primary third down blocking and receiving back, so he gets a little bit more field time with that. Khalil Herbert is getting used in the goal line, and Devonta Foreman kind of gets everything in between. We got to remember, Foreman really was not on this offense in the beginning. They signed him, and then he was just a healthy scratch for a couple weeks. It's a complete mess at backfield. None of these guys are going to actually help you or be startable in your fantasy league. Just drop them all, make some room. And we can also drop Samaje Perine. He is a pretty premium handcuff to Javonte, because if he were to get injured, he would be probably close to a startable league-winning guy. But again, if you don't have Javonte, there's really no reason in keeping Perine in hope of an injury, because we can't predict those kinds of things. He's completely phased out. He doesn't really have any kind of role in the receiving game. His snaps aren't really there. The reason we keep guys like Tajay Spears is because they are backup running backs, but they have value and they're already used in the offense. Again, the only way I would keep Perine or any of these backups that don't really have initial value is if your opponent that you're playing against has one of those starting running backs and you want to kind of play defense, or you're just hoping for an injury and you got infinite room on your bench. That's all up to you. Look at your situation and make the decision then. Again, Jeff Wilson is another one of these dead weight running backs we don't need to be adding or really keeping on our bench. We have Achane, we have Raheem Mostert, get him off the roster. And if you have KJ Osborne, he is droppable as of now. Justin Jefferson is slated to come back this week. Even if he's not really going to be utilized anyways. This isn't the Kirk Cousins led offense anymore that's averaging 40, almost 50 passing attempts a game, having the most passing yards in the NFL every season consistently. We got Josh Dobbs. Yeah, it was a good fun story when he first got here. He is still a decent viable quarterback, but he is no Kirk Cousins as far as supporting fantasy wide receivers goes. KJ Osborne can be dropped. He's the third or even fourth option on this team now. And if you're holding on to Juwan Johnson, just let go. He had some opportunities last week. Taysom Hill is the guy. He dropped a good amount of passes, kind of cementing himself out of the starting lineup and out of the depth chart. Taysom Hill's a guy that we should and will have on our rosters. If he's available, pick him up. He is a tight end you want. He has a lot of dual threat ability. You guys already know that. But that is going to finish off this video of the top traps on the waiver wire. I talked about a whole bunch of stuff in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know by dropping a like on this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.